Cell phones and beepers, and we'll begin the program.
Good evening, everyone. Have you got me, Bruce? Okay. For those of you who don't know me, but I think I know virtually everyone here, my name is Padma McGilloway, and my husband Riemann and I are the spiritual directors of Ananda in the greater Seattle area. And Riemann left very early this morning to represent us in Assisi, where Swamiji's body is laying in state doesn't work for a spiritual soul. Laying in spirit. And there'll be a service there Wednesday morning at 11:30, and all the colonies, or many of the colonies, are represented at that service. But we had our own, so I'm with you. And I'd like to begin this evening with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashai, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and beloved Master, Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow at your feet. And now from the Astral Ascension ceremony that Swamiji wrote, lift us from darkness, delusion, and uncertainty. Please hold these words in prayer into the clear light of thy presence. Ignite our earthliness with the flames of infinity. Inflame our hearts with thy love. Inflame our souls with thy joy. Om, peace, Amen. I'd like to invite Catherine up to give us a brief description, historical more, of Swamiji's life, since some of you may not be aware of everything.
And I've been charged to do this in 5 minutes. And if those of you who know how prolific and how much Swamiji offered to us, you'll know this is mission impossible. But Swamiji was, of course, born in 1926. And so at his passing, he's 87 years old, even though he's a child of eternity.
86, he was going to be 87.
That's right. Oh. He's 87. Oh. We'll move on. Hold the child of eternity thought. The rest of it doesn't matter.
Welcome to my world.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So, as a child, he was born in Teleagen, Romania. I think most of you know that. And of American parents, his father worked for ESSO there. Many of his stories, he relates a lot of these things in his stories. But his education, he was educated firstly in Romania, then in Switzerland, in a school that was French-speaking, and then in England, and then finally in the United States. But when I think about the perfect vehicle for someone who belongs to no country and no age, What a perfect background and upbringing, because he was equally at home in Europe and India, all over the world. He was a man with no country in every country. He was immediately at home with everyone, and that was, I think, part of that foundation came to him through his education. But he quickly discovered that formal education was empty, and he was, as all of you know, from the very beginning, even as a child, he had a burning desire to know truth and to know what are the lasting eternal verities. And he knew that education wasn't going to provide this. And so after a stint as attempting to be a playwright in Carolina after he was out of college, and he tells of that time period where he was actually accepted. He worked with a small theater group, but he realized that he knew nothing of truth. How could he help others through writing? Because his main goal always was upliftment. And the way he put it always was, why should I flood the world with my ignorance? And he realized the first thing that he had to do was to know truth, to know God at his core. So he decided to launch upon the life of a hermit. He thought maybe by living simply in countries with not such pumped up economies as the United States, he could find a life of solitude and discover who and what God is. But Master had other things in mind for him. In 1948, just after he put his mother on a ship for Egypt, and his father was already overseas, he was wandering around New York, Manhattan, and was drawn to a bookstore where he found, again, this is 1948, Paramahansa Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi. And like so many of us, he resisted at first, but ultimately bought it. He read it cover to cover, and within 3 days, he was on a bus, coast to coast, to Los Angeles to find Yogananda, because here at last he realized was a man who knew God, who knew truth, and could help him know God. And he, as we all know, came into Yogananda's ashram, and his first words were, "I want to be your disciple." Not words that someone in the 1940s would utter. I've always marveled at that unfolding. And Yogananda, of course, accepted him immediately. And within a year, Yogananda placed him in charge of the male monastics, the monks, at his organization, Self-Realization Fellowship. And nearly very soon after that, he charged him with initiating people into Kriya Yoga. If you all, many of you here have received Kriya initiation. If you can imagine, after 1 year of barely having Kriya yourself, being charged with initiating others, this is, Yogananda groomed him immediately to be, recognized in him, I should say, immediately, that here was the man who had the karma to understand his mission perfectly and who had the fire and the expansive spirit to take it out to others. So Swamiji was then, after Yogananda's passing in 1952, Swamiji was in charge of the international centers for Self-Realization Fellowship. So again, he traveled the world and met with devotees everywhere, and he was just on fire to see Master's work spread, to see these teachings spread. And throughout that time period also, he questioned and wondered when was Self-Realization Fellowship going to begin communities? Because throughout Yogananda's lifetime, he spoke of communities as being the way, the lifestyle pattern for Dwapara Yuga, for the future, the way that people could live simply and live spiritually, simple living and high thinking. But that was to be something that then Kriyananda was going to be freed from his responsibilities in Self-Realization Fellowship. It was a painful episode in his life, but as we know as devotees, every momentary pain eventually becomes a doorway through which our spirit can expand and God shows us the next step. And this was very much the case for Swamiji, because after his leaving Self-Realization Fellowship, he was drawn into a series of events that led to him purchasing the many hundred acres that comprise Ananda Village in Northern California. And now, of course, there are 10 cooperative communities worldwide that are connected with Ananda, hundreds and hundreds of meditation groups worldwide. There are living wisdom schools based on a curriculum and philosophy designed by Swami Kriyananda based on the teachings of Master. And we have one here in Seattle, and many of the branch communities have living wisdom schools. He's, of course, written, Padma tells me that it just, in the last week, the count of his books, published books, is 150. And very, very appropriately, the very last one was his complete rewrite of cooperative communities, how to start them and why. Very fitting for one of the crowning works of his life. And he's also written, all of you know, around 400 pieces of music. Many of you might not know that there was an era where he took thousands and thousands of photographs, exquisite windows onto God's beauty through nature. I'm just terrified of leaving anything out here, so I'm going to put on my glasses for a short minute here. Of course, he's taped many television programs, and these are currently being aired daily in India. And I believe there's a way to pick up those broadcasts in the United States, but I don't know what those are. On the internet, you can do it? Okay. And the final, in this final phase of his life, he has been very involved in movies. The very first one is on cooperative communities, and it's called Finding Happiness. And it's going to debut in a number of locations, not just at Ananda Village. And you might want to stay tuned, because it may be that very, very soon the Seattle debut will take place, maybe even in May. So stay tuned for that possibility. But he also wrote scripts for a movie on the life of Master. There is one that is a biography of his own life. And then very recently, he rewrote a lovely novel by a 19th century author named Marie Corelli on the life everlasting. And Swamiji was working on a script also for that book on reincarnation and soulmates.
And the time tunnel.
And the time tunnel is also a script. If you were here for Swamiji's visit in September, we did just a little vignette from that play at the high tea for Swamiji. So Swamiji's, the many, many offerings, that the many windows onto God's love that he's given us, just, it's not finished. There's much, much more to come. And I don't know what else to say. I may start weeping if I speak anymore, so I will stop there and let others speak. Thank you.
Jamana?
I want to entitle my remarks as Leadership with Love. Swamiji asked me to manage the East-West Bookshop in 1981, and I was just recently married. And he took a little bit of time to decide whether Vasudeva and myself should marry, because we were very, very different, and he wasn't so sure how that balance would work out. Because he took a very outspoken man and a very quiet-spoken woman. But the genius, the leadership and love genius, was that he asked me to be the manager of the shop. He gave me 6 months to get my feet wet. And then just casually one day in the living room said, "Vas, why don't you join your wife at the bookshop?" So we did that together for 13 years. And he was my boss, really. He was the one when I felt unable to resolve a certain crossroads, I could call him up. These were the wonderful days. I could pick up the phone. "Swamiji, what do I do about this?" And the the way in which he trained me in each individual circumstance has stayed with me all this time. I know some of you have heard these stories, but they just are so insightful. His ability to lead you in the most loving vibration. My husband came from Brooklyn, New York, from the streets of Brooklyn, and he was loud. And when he was under tension, he was very loud. And one day, I don't know what possessed me, why I thought I could do this, but I picked up the phone and I said, "Swamiji, Voss is yelling at me a lot." Dead silence. And then he said, "Jacqueline, he can't help it. He's from New York City." What did that tell me? One, I should drop being self-righteous about someone else's behavior. I should be loyal to my husband. I should be forgiving. I should be expansive. And certainly for me, loving that man, I wanted to be as expansive as I possibly could to embrace who he was. Also, the whole aspect of running a bookshop was totally new, and I was scared stiff. And I said to him one day, "Swamiji, what am I going to do? I don't know all these ologies, all these isms. You know, all I know is Jungian work." That was one of my doorways. And of course, Master, and then the Christian saints that I loved for years. He said, "Jamuna," he didn't say Jamuna, he said, "Jacqueline, the customers will be the ones who will teach you the books. Just be their friend. Leadership in love. Just be their friend. They are the Buddhists. You know, they are the tarot readers. They are the ones who know." And so I learned to walk around the store as if I knew something with a customer. But when we'd get to the shelves, I'd stand there and just think about what Swamiji said. And I'd choose a book and they'd say, "I like this one better." And I'd go, "Great, that's perfect because you've chosen it." So he was absolutely right. He tuned in that way. It was just masterful.
So I had the great pleasure of spending some time with this great soul, Swami Kriyananda, who is with us as we speak, of course. And he just was the epitome. Not only did he do great things, as we know, we've been talking about incredible things, but he was a model for everything that he said, everything he did. He was an example to me of perfect discipleship, something to really reach and grow for. And there's so many stories about how he modeled this. An example that comes to mind was when I was living at Ananda Village, working at Crystal Clarity Publishers. And he was what I would call one of the most positive, energetic, and enthusiastic people I've ever known. I don't think he ever even had a negative thought. And certainly not a negative word or action. But he, when I was there, we did a lot of music, but one of the books that we published was a small little book that doesn't exist right now because he rewrote it, but it was called Do It Now. And it was a little gift book, since having been written to do it well. And anyway, I always remember him coming in with this little book. Once we got it, I brought it over to him and showed it to him, and he just opened it up, and with such childlike joy, he said, "Wow," he said, this book will just sell thousands of copies. He said, "This book will change thousands of lives." He said, "This is the best book I've ever written. Don't you think so?" Well, I hadn't quite arrived at that conclusion, but I did not. Because just his enthusiasm was just catching in such a special way. And he said, and I want to give these copies away. I just want to give them away. They're so good. I want to give them away, get them out there. And so he just gave away thousands of those books. They're a very special experience. And another time when we had, actually it was more of an adversarial situation that happened that I was a part of, was there with some others, and he was being quite severely attacked by some people. And anyway, he had to sit there and just kind of listen to it, and it was very difficult for those of us there to listen to these people tearing down everything about who he was and what he did. And of course, it was totally untrue. There was no truth behind it. It was just accusations. And when lunchtime came, we went and joined Swami to go out to lunch, and we were feeling just awful. I thought, oh, we're going to have to console him, somehow we have to help him through this, And, it was incredible. We walked up to Swami, and he goes, "Hi, great souls." He said, "I'm famished. Let's go out and have a good lunch." And he had this, the way he stands straight and tall right from his heart, he leads from his heart center, and we just strode out of where we were and we had a fabulous lunch. We never ever talked about all the negativity going on. He lifted us. We were the ones in the doldrums, and he just lifted us up with his energy, with his positive, enthusiastic nature. Just sometimes it's amazing what he's able to do. So Swamiji is the example that we all can strive for forever, for the rest of our lives.
I haven't had the privilege of knowing Swamiji personally, having had a relationship with him like some of the others have, but I've been studying his writings, so I want to talk a little bit about Swamiji's writings and what they have meant. I came on the path to understand what I left behind. Having grown up in India in a semi-orthodox Hindu family, I was familiar with karma and reincarnation and yoga and Vedanta and so forth. But I understood so little that I failed to realize how little I understood. Okay? It's like Jamuna was saying, spreading my ignorance. Then when I came on the path, I started reading Swamiji's works. His writings are so awesomely simple. It's quite extraordinary how simple it is. And part of that simplicity comes from making it real. No matter how arcane the topic is, Swamiji finds a way to relate it to something very real, keep it at the ground level, so to speak. Do it in a way that we can relate to it. And he explains all of these concepts, which in India, no Swami is a Swami until he explains something extremely complicated in an even more complicated way. That's how you prove your mettle of Swamihood. Of course, Swamiji takes an entirely different approach. He revels in simplicity. But the last few years, I'm coming to realize that calling Swamiji a master explainer, so to speak, is really missing the point by a mile. I've come to realize that there is a vibrational quality to his writings. Often I'm reading something that he's written, and I'm uplifted for no reason. I feel sometimes even when I don't understand what's going on, or even if the topic is not that interesting, I feel uplifted for no particular reason, and I've often wondered why that is the case. Swamiji, of course, has written about a staggering variety of topics, from education to Vedanta to relationships and, of course, to yoga. But I feel in all of his writings, he leads us, zooms in on a few simple truths that form the basis, the undercurrent of all of his writings. Devotion, for example, devotion to the spiritual path, devotion to Guru, of course, devotion to God. How it's far more important to live your spiritual path instead of talking about it or thinking about it or reasoning about it. Or most importantly, attunement to Guru and the grace that flows from it. he writes about this, but most importantly, Swamiji has lived these truths. So it's his devotion, it's his attunement that imbue his written word with the vibrational power. And I'm beginning to feel that more and more. So Swamiji's writings, I feel it's not about the written word, but about the life that lived them, about the life that lived those words. About a month ago, I had exchanged a few emails with Swamiji. And in one of my last emails, I had written about a few things. And he wrote back on, and he commented or answered on all the topics that I had written about, except one, the last sentence that I wrote. The one he chose not to comment on was the sentence where I said, "And Swamiji, please be with us for a long, long time." And I realize now that he is with us with the vibration of his written word, and of course with us forever in spirit.
I came to Ananda in 1988, mostly because of the vibration. Very different family than Morley's, Scotch, Irish, English, and Dutch, and all over the place. I was very intellectual, very much in my head, didn't know very much about what to do with emotions and feelings, although I had lots of them that got me into a lot of trouble. And I heard Swami's music. And I saw some people who were disciples of Swami Kriyananda and of Master. And I remember, if some of you will know Savitri from the Expanding Light, she's still teaching there. She's my spiritual mom. She introduced me to this path. And I remember seeing her at a Sunday service in a little bookstore in San Diego, California. I didn't know anything about Hatha Yoga, very little about it. I was taking a class, but didn't know anything about the spiritual aspects of it. I didn't know what a guru was. I didn't know any of those things, but I looked at her and I felt her energy, and I said, whatever that woman has, that's what I want. And 1 month later, I went to Ananda Village, and I met Swami Kriyananda for the first time at his birthday party. And someone introduced me to him, and I didn't realize this at the time, but he had very painful hips at that time. He had to have 2 hip operations later. He actually stood up and greeted me and looked into my eyes and said, "Welcome." And I felt over the years, that's what Swamiji said to every single person he met. No matter what country I've seen him in. I've seen him in Italy, I've seen him in India, just recently, thank God. And I've seen him here. Every person I've ever seen him interact with, he looks them in the eye and in some way says welcome to them. And I'm going to miss seeing him in person or knowing that I can see him in person. But I have to say, if I had to describe what 3 words to describe him with, I would say gratitude, I would say joy, and I would say humor. And he taught me that if you can be grateful, no matter what's happening in your life, in one of my big tests, he wrote me one little note and he said, "Don't be afraid, trust in God's grace." And every once in a while I get out that letter when I'm facing a lot of fear. And then I remember the joy when he came to Rhode Island, when we had a little center there trying to start. And he was so gracious with everyone. People were running around and trying to get ready for him because we were all wanting everything to be just perfect. And he walked in, and as soon as he walked in, everything, like others have described, just lifted. And a friend said to me, "Wherever Swamiji is, everything blossoms." And I think he would be so happy to have us to know, I'm sure he's seeing us right now actually, being here together, because we're like his flowers, we're like his children. And all of us can blossom with the legacy that he's left us in the music, in the books, and in the humor. He introduced us to P.G. Wodehouse. If you haven't ever read P.G. Wodehouse or heard of him, you have a lot of fun in store for you. He used to read P.G. Wodehouse to us at holidays because it gave us a way to relax together and yet be uplifted and to laugh. And we really needed to laugh over the years. And so I thank him for that. And I think that's all I need to say.
Like Swami, I came across the country from New England to California in 1979. I'd read the autobiography of a yogi twice, and I thought it was a great book, and it got me very enthusiastic about meditation and about the spiritual path. But when I was coming across the country, I had numerous destinations in mind. I was going to visit a lot of different places, including Ananda Village. But I was reading Swami's autobiography, The Path. And as I drove during the day and pulled over at rest stops and at night and read that book, all the other stops on my trip I forgot about. And I just wanted to make a beeline to Ananda Village, because Swami's book introduced me to Master in a way that even Master's own book didn't. And I see now that it's fairly obvious. Master is so humble, and so many of the stories in Autobiography of a Yogi take place when he was a young boy, and he talks about these towering spiritual figures and pointing the finger at them. And so it's understandable that you fail to realize that it's the author of this book that's really got something. Well, Swami's book is the same way. I didn't really realize who Swami Kriyananda was when I was driving across the country, but he introduced me to Master and made me a disciple on that trip. I've since come, took me a lot of years to appreciate Swami's greatness also. And I think the one thing that I just want to say, well, so many of his talks at Ananda Village were such a gift to me. I remember being encouraged by Shivani to go sit up front, go sit in front of him, right in front of him. That's not being selfish. And he would give weekly talks at the village that are now recorded on the Treasures Along the Path recordings. And they're so priceless. He talks about so many different subjects and touches on so many different aspects of Yogananda's mission and life around the world and different nationalities and the future and Dwapara Yuga and education and all these different subjects. And I was just thrilled. And the music that he wrote touched me very, very deeply. But the one thing that I wish to just share with you, again, as Prem Shanti was talking about, when we were in Rhode Island running this retreat center, and he came 3 times over the many years that we were there, and we cared deeply about the people that we had met there and that we were nurturing on the spiritual path. And it was a big deal to have Swami Kriyananda come and have them hopefully be able to meet him. And he was elderly in those years. This was the early 2000s, and his body has not been well for a long time. But he sat in that chair after giving a public program and greeted people one by one in the sweetest, kindest way, looking at each person deeply in their eyes, remembering often their name, even though he hadn't seen them for a long time, saying kind and thoughtful things about them if he knew them at all, and if he was meeting for the first time, just in that wonderful way that he did so often, just greeting each person as if he was their dearest friend. And I watched him, and no way did he sort of peek around to see how long the line was out the door. No way did he break his concentration. Each person was a new friend, a new incarnation of his guru right there before him. And it touched me so deeply to watch his persistent giving, person after person after person, each one of whom would float away in bliss after their little time with him. It was such a wonderful example. We've seen it in so many different places, everywhere he goes around the world, giving and giving selflessly. The other example of that touches me so deeply is when Swami goes out to the store. When he came to Rhode Island, we had the opportunity to go shopping with him on a couple of things. And in the case where he's just talking to a salesperson or a waitress, somebody who's not coming for any teaching, somebody that's never going to see again, and he's so kind and so thoughtful. What do you think of this product? What would you recommend? oh, how interesting. And so many people have been touched by this soul. It's been a great honor to be his friend.
Hello. Well, I came to Ananda about 20 years ago now, and about 10 years ago was quite honored when I was asked to teach on behalf of Ananda and on behalf of Swami Kriyananda, which I've done over the years now in different capacities. But in all of this time, all of these about 20 years, you know, I'm not one of the people that has had any particular kind of personal connection with Swamiji. And, you know, nothing beyond what many of us have had, which is I've been present at talks, I've come up and I've greeted him, you know, I've had a few of those kinds of opportunities, and of course done all the reading and listening to tapes, but nothing really very much in that direct way that many people have. And so in those early years, I actually had a lot of sadness. I felt kind of really weird about that, I should say. I loved Master, and I loved Ananda, and yet Swami felt distant to me. He wasn't real. There was a remote quality, and I kind of couldn't grasp what to do about that or what that was. But then gradually the realization grew. I did love Master, and Master was my guru, and the reason that I found Master, the reason that I have this guru, is because of Swamiji's selfless service in founding Ananda. It's Ananda, here we are, and this is this unbelievably beautiful expression of who Swami is and what his connection is, his guru, our guru too. And so the more I attuned myself with Master, the more I tuned in to all of these amazing people, a lot of them in blue, but a lot of other ones too here. Had satsang with them, served with them, and just generally tried to serve Ananda in, you know, all kinds of, you know, stuffing envelopes and answering phones and whatever. The more I did that, the more my connection to Swami deepened and ultimately became very, very palpable. Because what I learned is that my heart was opening in a new way, and I was attuning myself to Master, but I was also attuning myself to something else, which is that this sense of connection was not about a personal relationship with someone. It was about attuning myself and connecting to Swamiji as that channel, the channel that's bringing all of these to us and bringing us to them. And that channel we know and we've heard tonight of the just bounty of gifts that have flowed through that channel to us. And I just, you know, these are a couple of tiny little things that I just want to share from these most recent weeks that have just really touched me, small as they may seem. I was on the pilgrimage trip and had the great joy and amazing blessing to be able to be in Pune and hear Swamiji give another talk on the Mahasamadhi Day right before he was leaving to head to Italy. And yet I was so stunned that when he came out and sat in the sun and said, well, I'm in the shade. Don't you think they'll be able to see me better if I'm in the sun? This from a person who was physically very weak. He had just in the past week or 10 days been suffering with double pneumonia. he's told us that he was completely deaf in his quote-unquote good ear. It was temporary, thankfully, but it was happening right then, so he could not hear himself speak. But his concern was that he was leaving the next day, and this was the only opportunity that he had to speak with us, to share with us. And so there he was with all of that amazing energy and joy and love pouring out of him to inspire and uplift and be a guide to us. And I was just in awe and so utterly moved beyond words that he was doing this. And then when I heard what happened on the morning of his passing, that he had gotten up, having been, of course, off and on unwell, but definitely not feeling well. And what had he done? The very first thing he had done, he had gone to his computer, and he had started to respond to these emails that pour into him from, who knows, among us perhaps, but people from all over the world. And it didn't matter what was happening in that body, in that physical form. What mattered was that he was in service, unwaveringly, without pause, regardless of anything in this physical form or this physical body. He was there to serve Master by serving us and guiding us in whatever way he could. And I find that so deeply inspiring. Those are among perhaps the smaller gifts, I don't know, but I just hope that I may receive, his gifts will continue to flow. I hope that I may honor that flow by taking those gifts, even the small ones, and hopefully some of the bigger ones, and putting them into my life so that I may move closer to God. And I just want to share one last image. When we were in Pune, he was leaving that Sunday morning. I think it was a Sunday morning, or was it a Monday morning? I don't remember. But he was leaving to go to the airport to head to Italy. And so we all lined the dirty, dusty road down from his house out of the property. And slowly, slowly, his car came by, and everybody was singing and waving to him, and he's in the car, he's on the left side, and he's, waving. And we were snapping pictures of the car and whatnot, and then as he went through the main corridor of people, suddenly the window rolled down, and I stepped out into the road, and I saw this little hand come out the window. I saw the back of the hand moving like this, and we're all waving to him. He was on his way home. He was beginning his journey home.
I just have two stories. I won't say very many words, but these are stories that I think show how Swami meets people where they are and accepts them who they are. So this happened many, many years ago when I was just new to Ananda and heard that Swami Kriyananda was going to be speaking in downtown Seattle. And
Makes noise.
Okay. And so I went downtown Seattle for that occasion, and I wanted to get a latte before the event. And so I went to the latte stand, and I had the latte. I just had received it from the barrister. I kind of turned my head, and here comes Swami Kriyananda with his entourage. And I had this thought in mind that, a good devotee wouldn't be drinking this stuff. And so I turned to him and I said, "I'm trying to quit." And he said, "I like coffee too." So that he knew exactly where I was coming from, and he was just trying to put me at my ease. The second story happened fairly recently when Swami visited here for the last time, and I was asked to accompany him on keyboard for a song that he was going to sing, and he wanted to meet with me briefly before that so he could get the key right and those kinds of things. You know, I was, of course, nervous about meeting him, and so we met in one of the offices downstairs with the young girl who was helping guide him around and helping him walk and stuff. And so we got the key straight, and then he turned to his assistant and says, "Do you think his earlobes are as big as mine?" And she said, "No, Swami."
That's great. I'll tell one brief story. When I was visiting actually Rhode Island on a retreat there of the writers when Swami was there. And I can't remember what brought me to the East Coast. I was already serving here in Seattle. And we went out to lunch with him one day with about 3 or 4 friends. And Swami, his father grew deaf in the last 20 years of his life, and Kriyananda also suffered from that. And so one ear was completely deaf and the other was on its way, you know, not so great, but he could hear a little, which was really hard in public work. So he always spent time trying to find, he loved state-of-the-art, the latest everything. So he always had the latest gadget in hearing aids. And one of these was one that had a little remote that he could point, you know, to where he wanted to hear. So we're at the lunch table, and restaurants are especially hard for people who are hard of hearing. And so he had that little thing on the table, and he had it pointed to, you know, whoever was talking. And then at a certain point, he excused himself, and he went to the restroom. And the rest of us kept talking. And none of us noticed that that little thing was still on the table. And we were saying things that we would normally not necessarily talk about around him, you know. And a few minutes later, he came back to the table and he finished our sentence. But it was a great lesson that God's always listening. And indeed, you know, I reflected on that story. In fact, I shared it with Narayani at a little birthday dinner we had when we were in Pune together. I don't know why. I think we were doing another hearing aid thing with him, and I was warning her. And we'd never really told it to Swami quite that way, you know. So I shared it at that table. It was the one story I shared that night. But it certainly is a reflection to me now that God is always listening, and that Swami is always listening because he's in our heart, because he has never been his body. He's always been spirit, and spirit is everywhere. It doesn't need the form of a body to be with us, as we know in our inner lives. I wanted to just take a few minutes here and share with you in his own words I mentioned on Sunday at the prayer vigil that he had written in 1999, as it turns out, it was his own will and testament and legacy. And I found that he made some slight edits to it in 2005 when he went to live in India for a while. But I wanted to read it to you. I'm not going to read the will part. It's pretty short because he didn't really own any material things. So he's just saying, I didn't own these things, I stewarded them, but there were a few special things, his bangle, his what do they call it, a navritam, something or other, the jewel bangle as well, that he asked that his successor, the spiritual director, of Ananda worldwide, who we named as Jyotish and names in this will as well, would wear that. But then in his testament, he says, the purpose of my testament is to state certain fundamental beliefs which to me are of paramount importance in the further guidance of the development of Ananda. I request that my successors consider this testament binding on them in their service to the work I have founded, which I pass on to them herewith as Ananda's future custodians. And he named his successors in the will part. Besides his successors, some other assistants as well. Ananda is not and never has been my own work personally. I founded in the name of and did my earnest best to carry it out in the spirit of my guru Paramahansa Yogananda and of his line of gurus, Sri Yukteswar Mahavatar Babaji, Lahiri Mahashaya and Swami Sri Yukteswar. The last in this line of gurus is Paramahansa Yogananda. Should anyone look upon me as his spiritual teacher, I ask that he do so as a representative of our line of gurus and not as a guru in my own separate right. B, because my role in life has been, to the best of my ability, to interpret as I've understood them the will and teachings of our line of gurus and of my own guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, and not to define them absolutely. Should any dispute arise among my successors concerning the correct interpretation of that will and of those teachings, I request that they be guided by the following considerations. A, they should ask themselves, what would Kriyananda have done or decided in this circumstance? For I have tried always to act as our Guru's representative. Let my successors therefore not ask what my fellow disciples might have done or have decided in like circumstance, except after giving due consideration to the fact that Ananda is itself a particular ray of my Guru's mission and teachings. B, should any evident discrepancy appear between my own words, actions, or decisions and those of Paramahansa Yogananda, then after deep and prayerful consideration, let my successors give primary respect to his will and example as they understand it, not to my own will. This instruction must be weighed in the light of any possible misunderstanding on my own and on their part of his will and example. C, inasmuch as new and unanticipated circumstances are likely to arise from time to time, for which tradition affords no clear guideline, I request that my successors depend as much as possible on their inner spiritual attunement to Paramahansa Yogananda and to our line of gurus, perhaps as manifested in my own life and service to him. C, an important part of my own life work has been to carry to its logical conclusion Paramahansa Yogananda's endeavors to show how his spiritual teachings may be applied in more mundane avenues of life. Thus, following his example, I have written books and taught classes which show how to apply those teachings in practical matters, such as leadership, child education, marriage, and worldly success as examples only, apart from my books and classes on meditation and other more obviously spiritual topics. I have tried to express, in addition, the vibrations of my Guru's mission through the media of music, photography, and of other art forms. It is natural and indeed desirable that departments be formed and dedicated to the spreading of each of these aspects of our work. In these respects, I want it understood that, first, what I have done was never intended to be comprehensive, but was meant to be seminal in order that others might pursue further in other lines of development the ideas I expressed. Second, my plan has been that this further development continue what I have already set into motion and not take off in what might be termed end runs, initiated in an entirely new or different ways from those initiated by me and our line of gurus. Whereas the possibility of such new ways is imaginable, Ananda itself, if it is to remain strong, should endeavor always to honor the traditions from which its particular ray of divine truth has originated. Third, Ananda is a spiritual work and not a business. Any interpretation, therefore, of Ananda's future directions should be founded on one consideration primarily, the question, what will be best to further Ananda's spiritual mission? For example, it may sometimes be tempting to make Ananda's primary consideration one of monetary profit or worldly recognition, or the question of making the teachings available to the greatest possible number of people. It is important instead for the spiritual ideals that have been passed down to us through our line of gurus to remain the fundamental reason for Ananda's existence. Worldly acceptance is not important to us except to the extent that it helped people spiritually. God's acceptance of our offering to him, of our lives and service, is the only thing that should matter to my successors. Fourth, regardless of anyone's treatment of us, we must work steadfastly for universal spiritual harmony and unity. Schism, even if forced upon us, must never be initiated by Ananda itself, nor recognized as desirable. Ananda must work for the well-being of all and never give greater importance to its own perceived well-being and prosperity in any circumstance in which these ends must be obtained at the cost of the needs and well-being of anyone else. Fifth, Self-Realization Fellowship, or SRF, must always be considered part of Ananda's broader spiritual family. If at any time the occasion should arise that might permit the two organizations to work cooperatively, Ananda ought to make every reasonable effort to do so. For SRF is the organization founded by our Guru and must be given full respect for his sake. Although certain Ananda members have expressed a feeling, parenthesis, admittedly with some reason, of resentment over the treatment I myself have received from them, my earnest request is that they, too, behave always kindly and respectfully toward SRF, regardless of any provocation from them, as indeed I myself have always tried to behave. Our attitude toward them should be one of forgiveness and love. I ask this not out of ordinary human consideration, but out of love for our mutual Guru, who came on earth to inspire people with divine love and not to infuse in them the spirit of sectarian rivalry. D, for any appointment of positions to leadership, the primary considerations should always be these: devotion, selfless service to others, impersonal dedication to truth and to justice, and attunement to the will of God as it is expressed through the spiritual ray manifested in the founding of Ananda. E, for the appointment of Ananda's ministers, the primary qualifications are that they be men and women of deep and sincere devotion, of humility, of attunement to the spiritual ray expressed through Ananda, and that they manifest impersonal love for others. An intuitive feeling I define primarily as love for the divine spark that exists in everyone, that soul which aspires eternally toward unity with God. F, for acceptance into Ananda membership, the primary requirement should be their spiritual fitness, not their wealth, worldly sophistication, or skills and ability. Legacy. My legacy to Ananda is spiritual in nature, primarily, and consists of the teachings, ideals, and vibrations that I have received from my Guru. My wish is that Ananda always remain true to these principles and remain faithful to the following twin ideals based on the example and teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. 1, that Ananda strictly honor the dictum, people are more important than things. For people, especially in their spiritual needs, will always be more important than any organizational exigency. 2, that Ananda remain true to our motto, Jatto Dharma Tatto Jaya. Where there is adherence to right attitude and action, there is victory. Indeed, Ananda should define itself in terms of this principle and never seek victory even for the sake of its own survival at the cost of this principle. If Ananda's institutional survival demands that this ideal be compromised, survival itself will no longer be worthwhile. For again, Ananda is a spiritual institution primarily. It is, moreover, a spiritual ideal, for the meaning of Ananda is divine bliss. Kindness and compassion must always and resolutely be given primary consideration. These are more important than even the best thought out rules and precedents. My statement in this paragraph must, however, be construed in the light of divine truth, which, although always loving, is at the same time impersonal. Thus, even as physicians may demonstrate greater actual compassion when they inflict a temporary pain on their patients than when they spare them the pain but ensure a much greater suffering later on, a rule of divine compassion is sometimes stern, necessarily so, and may not be immediately appreciated by its recipients. Hence, the following further request in my legacy. 3, that my successor's first consideration be not public opinion, nor an individual's needs as construed by that person, but a sincere effort at attunement with the will of God and with his love. 4, that God's and Guru's will, not the mere pleasure of human beings, nor any consideration of worldly popularity, be Ananda's first consideration in all its decisions and actions. It is my hope, finally, that Ananda will always remain faithful to the following priorities. Our primary goal is to find God and to unite our souls with him in divine love. B, our secondary goal is to serve God above all, free from influence of passing fads and opinions. And then he says some legal things and signs, and a few people witnessed it. Pretty amazing. I think it speaks volumes of what he has been an instrument of for us all, and holds us to the highest octave of each and every one of us, our own spiritual divine promise. We'd like to show 2 quick video clips. You know what? Where is Dakshina? Would it be too late to just do the one of people? He's There's one they sent of him lying in state in the temple the same day he left his body in Italy. Which was only yesterday. That's his secretary. I just read in an email, no, I don't need to do this, but the others will. Just read in an email from Assisi that they must have looser laws over there, but they're allowing the body to remain there all the way through this coming weekend. And so people are coming from all over Europe. And at the service on Wednesday, his body will be in the temple as well, which is a great blessing. Let's do a chant. What? Going to do the pole star of my life?
Are the words on the sheet?
Yes. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. For my sea is dark and my stars are gone. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee, O star of my life. I have made thee, O star of my life. For my sea is dark and my stars are gone. For my sea is dark and my stars are gone. Still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee, O star of my life. I have made thee, O star of my life. I have made thee. Stars are gone, oh my sea is dark, and my stars are gone. Still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy.
We'll have our Astral Ascension ceremony for Swamiji. The pilot of life has come to redeem our beloved Swamiji. We know that the Redeemer is his friend, come to fetch him away from the land of broken dreams to the highland of life. We are come together on an occasion of dual meaning, mixed with sadness and with joy. The sadness is ours for the time. The joy in whose spirit is now risen. In the words of the psalmist in the 23rd Psalm are those of Swamiji now. For he is in the bosom of the Lord and can truly say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
And from Paramahansa Yogananda's Whispers from Eternity. Thine astral airplane of earthly parting came to take my soul away. I wondered through what strange skies I was to soar, and to what lands I was to travel. I asked the mystic pilot of cosmic law whither I was going. The silent one answered soundlessly, I am the pilot of life, mistakenly called the terrible death by ignorant earthfolk. I am thy brother, uplifter, redeemer, friend, unloader of thy gross burden of body troubles. I come to fetch thee away from the land of thy broken dreams to the highland of light, where poisonous vapors of sorrow can never climb. I have mercilessly broken thy cage of flesh attachment, that thy soul bird may be free. I have broken thy chains of disease and mental fears. Thy long imprisonment behind the bars of bones made thee unwillingly become used to the cage. Thou didst want thy freedom always. Now why art thou fear-filled when thou hast won thy long-craved freedom? O bird of paradise, hop into my plane of omnipresence, fold thy long fluttering wings, and restfully ride with me anywhere, everywhere, in thine ethereal home.
Now we'd have a little music. Can't commemorate Swamiji's life without music. We're going to start, hopefully, with one where he's singing, but maybe not. Let's start with Love is a Magician, and then maybe the other one can go next.
is a green hill, home is a wind, blowing betrayal far, far away. Home is the knowledge heaven is near, home's the end of the fray. Home is my heart's land, home's where I am. Nothing can dim the light of my soul. Home is forever, home is today. Home's a heart that is home. Often I dream that life is a play, laughter forever and skies never gray. But when I'm silent, freed from all care, I discover my home's everywhere. Home is a green hill, home is a wind, blowing betrayal far, far away. Home is the knowledge heaven is near, home's the end of the fray. Home is my heart's land, home's where I am. Nothing can dim the light of my soul. Home is forever, home is today. Home's a heart that is home. Often I dream that life is a play, laughter forever and skies never gray. But when I'm silent, freed from all care, I discover my home's everywhere. Home is a green hill, home is a wind, blowing betrayal far, far away. Home is the knowledge heaven is near, home's the end of the fray.
You sing along with the choir on this song. The words are amazing. Okay. When they sing, you sing. On such short notice.
This is the portion of the service, the flower ceremony. The white rose symbolizes life in God and the purity of expression of the departed soul. The red rose symbolizes the bouquet of love and goodwill of the entire congregation. Concentrate on the red rose and offer your love and goodwill to Swamiji.
Please pray with me mentally. Mentally only. Dear Swamiji, you who have gone before us, have entered a realm which our souls remember, a place of freedom, light, and laughter. Take with you on your journey our blessings and our love. We shall miss you. Our desire is not to hold you back, but only to tell you, friend, we are yours. Our love and support are ever yours, and our prayers for your highest happiness. We shall meet again. Once more we shall laugh together, rejoice together, and share in the joy of seeking him. Claim your soul's freedom. Bless all who ever harmed you or ever wished you harm. Give them your love and your prayer for their freedom in God. Friend, cast from your heart all outward attachments. Realize that only earthly goals, however shining, are but dreams. God is the only reality. Burn your earthly desires in the fire of wisdom. Burn earthly limitations in the blaze of inner freedom. Burn earthly disappointments in the flames of spreading peace. Burn earthly joys in the bonfire of divine bliss. See your physical form as a discarded garment. Clothed you are now in garments of radiant light. O free soul, see your past actions as scenes in a vast unfolding tapestry. Feast not your gaze wistfully on episodes already finished, but look ahead. New adventures await you. Fresh, joyous victory as you advance toward perfect freedom. You know, I have to pause here. Yogananda said death would be his final sacrifice and he'd be free. So these last two paragraphs, they don't apply. I'm sorry. And what of us, friend, who love you and would be remembered by you? Behold us as threads of light in the tapestry of your life. Threads which, through the magnet of soul friendship, will appear ever and again, woven with increasing beauty as our hearts expand together in God's love. Divine Mother, receive this thy child. Purify him in thy perfect light and love. grant him eternal freedom in thee. Oh, amen. Let's have a few minutes of silence. Oh, Shanti. Amen. Let's see. The ministers that are going to help with the rose petals up here. Can you please come and do you have some over there? Okay. And I'm going to start. And Larry will start reading. And you're all invited to participate in the flower rose petal offering.
Thy cosmic life and I are one. Thou art the ocean, and I am the wave. We are one.
Come up many at a time, please.
Thou art the flame, and I am the spark. We are one. Thou art the flower, and I am the fragrance. We are one. Thou art the Father, and I am thy child. We are one. Thou art the beloved, and I am the lover. We are one.
Thou art the lover, and I am the beloved. We are one. Thou art the song, and I am the music. We are one. Thou art the spirit, and I am all nature. We are one. Thou art my friend, and I am thy friend. We are one. Thou art the master, and I am thy servant. We are one. Thou art my mother, and I am thy son. We are one. Thou art my master, I am thy disciple. We are one. Thou art the ocean, and I am the drop. We are one. Thou art all laughter. I am a smile. We are one. Thou art the light, and I am the atom. We are one. Thou art consciousness. I am the thought. We are one. Thou art eternal power, and I am strength. We are one. Thy peace and I are one. Thy joy and I are one.
Thy wisdom and I are one. Thy love and I are one. That is why thou and I are one. Thou and I were one, and thou and I will be one forevermore. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy. From joy I came. Sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy live, in sacred joy I melt again. Listen to my soul song, listen to my heart song, listen to my soul song, listen to my heart song. In secret in my soul, I will gather blossoms for thee, dipping the
benediction.
Visualizing our friend Swami Kriyananda, let's send him our blessings by sending out the waves of Om. We'll close with
Oh, we're done. Bless you all for coming. Thank you so much.